Earlier this year, Nikon released a firmware update to the Nikon Zf that enabled their Nikon Recipes, specifically their flexible color profile and the ability to download recipes over the cloud or from creators like myself. But that really opened up this camera to a completely new audience, me included. I actually ended up buying this camera when they released that firmware update so that I could put it to the test to see how it compared to something like Fujifilm simulations or their recipes. I did a whole video on it that you can check out here. And in today's episode, we're talking about a new firmware update that puts the Nikon Zf one step closer to Fujifilm. They've added the ability to add film grain to your images, and a bit more nuance than what even Fuji is offering. But we're gonna put it to the test today. I got the XE5 in my backpack. We got the Zf here. We'll take some comparison shots, but for the most part, we're gonna walk around and turn on the grain and turn off the grain and just see how it affects the images, see how it is implemented right here in the Zf, see if it's worth talking about or something that you actually might be interested in your own images. You know, being out here, I've realized that maybe I should stick with nature photography because I had the really genius bright idea to come down here on a beautiful Sunday afternoon, and there's a lot of people. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna film a video with a microphone and I'm gonna talk to the camera, and these little snot-nosed kids are running around. And so the implementation of film grain on the Nikon Zf is a bit different than it is on Fuji systems. On Fuji, there's basically 4 settings: strong, weak, small, large. On Nikon, there's 6 different intensities at 3 different sizes. So 3 times 6 is 18. Don't worry, I got a degree in math. I can promise you it's very likely 18. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take all 18 versions of the film grain on this, of the exact same shot, and I'm gonna take all 4 on the Fuji and see if the Nikon Zf can compete with Fujifilm's implementation. One thing I do know about that's nice about the film grain on here that I've been told is that it's not the same every time. So it's not just some filter layered over the image. The grain pattern changes every single image you take, regardless if you don't change the settings or not. It generates a new pattern every single time. Or before we jump into Lightroom, I just want to say that this film clip that you're watching right now is actually filmed on the Nikon Zf with film grain applied. Yes, you can apply film grain to video files. We'll talk about it more at the end of the video, but for now, let's jump in and take a closer look at some of the film grain implementation on the Nikon Zf. So here are all the images, 22 in total, and we could go through all of these and look at different film grain patterns by zooming in. This is gonna be small sensitivity 2, small sensitivity 3, small sensitivity 4, and you're gonna notice, obviously, it gets far more intense. But I thought a better way to go about this was to create a file that just has all of them in a grid where you can just look at them side by side. I'm actually gonna have this file linked down below in an article. I'm gonna give you the PSD file. So the best part about that is you can actually move these images around to take a look at them. So for example, later we're gonna compare these Fuji images to some of the Nikon images. With the PSD file, you can do that and you can zoom in to your heart's content to 100% and really get an idea of what the grain looks like. Now, the synopsis is, let's just zoom in to small and we'll just go across the board here. Here's 1, here's 2, 3, 4, and I think at this point you can probably tell it might be too compressed on YouTube, but past 3, it really starts to get to a point where I would probably never use this. Even 3 is really pushing it. I do think that it depends on your use case. So for example, if you're planning on printing any of these or seeing them on a large screen, I'd probably never go past 2. But if this was only meant for posting to something like social media, like Instagram or something, I could see you going to 3 so that it's more apparent on a smaller screen. But for the most part, in my testing, I would never go past sensitivity 1 or 2. Now, depending on small, medium, and large, that's totally up to you. One great thing we can do is we can actually, let's just compare the large sensitivity to the small sensitivity to, and you can get a side-by-side comparison. It actually, with the large rendition, it gives more of a, almost like dirtier, blurrier image, whereas the smaller one is more refined. I guess that makes sense, small and large size of the grain. But yeah, I think that that's a pretty quick synopsis of what I would end up doing. Let's put this back. And let's take a quick look at one of the Fuji files next to one of the Nikon files. We'll just put it right here. This is the large/weak setting in Fuji. And you can get a good idea that it's probably somewhere in between sensitivity 1 and 2 on the weak side of the grain pattern. Here, it's a little bit more noticeable than the sensitivity 1 medium on the ZF, but it's less noticeable than sensitivity 2. And this is actually something that I hope or wish Nikon may go back and change, is that the sensitivity 4, 5, and 6, pretty unusable for me. And I actually wish there was more granularity in between 1 and 2 and 3 to give you a bit more control over it if they're gonna give you this many options. But TLDR is that I probably would never go over 2, and then small, medium, or large are gonna depend on your needs. It'll also depend on the sensor size. This is the only camera that currently has film grain enabled, and it's only a 20 megapixel sensor, so that's gonna render the grain a little bit different. But if they end up adding the film grain to, let's say, the Z8 or a larger sensor camera, it might affect that camera differently. All right, really quick, I got a vent about how the film grain system is implemented in the menus of the ZF. What I mean by that is, you go into your menus and you can change things like intensity, sensitivity, size, those kind of things. But if I want to quickly access them, I can map film grain settings to a button, like this top button up here, or this front function button, or one of the other buttons. And I did that. The problem is, once you map it, the only thing you can change once you use that is on or off. Now, maybe once you kind of dial in what film grain looks good to you, all you really want to do is turn it on and off. But for this video, when I'm sitting here trying to test different intensities and the amount, I would like to be able to change it with a quick button. It's made worse by the fact that I can't add it to the I menu. And the I menu is just kind of like your Q menu or a quick menu that would be on Canon or Fuji. And if you, by the way, are confused about anything about your ZF settings, I have a full guide on my settings for the ZF. How I have all the buttons mapped, how I shoot with aperture priority, manual, how I have all my auto ISO settings, where every single button is mapped, my I menu, everything like that is in my guide down below. And I will be adding the film grain setting to my guide. I just wish I could add it to the I menu, because that would be a perfect spot to just quickly change a setting, in my opinion, is where it would be more usable, especially considering there's not a lot of function buttons on the ZF. It only has this one up front. And other than that, because of all the dials, there's not a lot you can customize. So I think it would be better in the I menu than it would be on a customizable button. So a bit of a miss. Hopefully they update that. Nikon, if you're watching, please add that to the I menu. So one of the really cool things about Nikon Recipes, if you're unfamiliar, is that they work on RAW files. They're not baked into like a JPEG, very similar to what Fuji does, which does have to bake them into the JPEG. That means you can take your images with a recipe applied, but still go in and change anything you want to change. It's not baked in to a JPEG. So I was very curious if the film grain settings would also be baked in to the RAW file or JPEG, or if you can turn them on and off in post. The good news is you can. Now, one caveat is that the film grain settings are not applied to recipes. So for example, if you download my recipes that are in the link in the description, you will not have different film grain settings apply to them. You have to pick the film grain settings you want for each recipe that you use. They're not baked into recipe files. But the benefit is that you can go in and turn off film grain. So if I take an image right now and open in NX Studio, I can turn off the film grain and it's gone. It also works in Lightroom. So when I've imported the one test image that I did into Lightroom, it adds film grain in the Lightroom settings, which you can also just turn off. This is super cool in my opinion. It means that you can take images with the grain applied, and if it's too much or too little, or you don't want it at all, you can just turn it off in post if you want to do that. Super cool, don't even have to take JPEGs. Dang, girl. That's a nice backpack.
Oh, you noticed?
Nope, could barely tell you were wearing it.
Oh, that's crazy.
What do you got in there?
Just my wildlife camera. I'm looking for the double-footed boba piper. It's very rare.
Oh, well, why don't you have your camera out? Where are you taking photos?
Well, it's raining right now, so I put it away, but if we get out of the rain, I can show you.
Oh, you have photos of the double-footed boba piper?
Very rare.
Okay, sweet. All right, I am excited to see what you've got going on in here. I mean, this bag is huge. You must have like a 600 mil, 800 mil.
I've got this.
Okay, well, I'm not here to camera shame, but I do have to ask, if that's your camera, what do you do with all this extra space?
I've got the one pocket for my camera, and the rest is for snacks.
Oh. Jokes aside, PJY Tech sent me over their One Pro ST backpack to sponsor today's video, and I actually don't own a camera system large enough to utilize what this thing is made for. This bag is specifically made for the big boys, your 600, 800, or even 1200 millimeter primes. And to hold that weight, this bag has a solid aluminum frame to keep weight off of your shoulders when you're using the waist strap. It also allows you to adjust the torso length for different sized users. The inside is easy to access with full-length YKK zippers, and most importantly, once you're inside, it's like a luxury dream bed for your camera and lens. You've got adjustable pads for your massive lens, and even an entire area for your camera to remain attached, ready to go at a moment's notice. Or in Sophia's case, lots of space for snacks. One feature I like is that it has a sturdy bottom panel so that you can sit it on the ground without worrying about the bag toppling over, even if you have a camera in it. It's got a waterproof camo cover, plenty of spots for your biggest tripod, and quite literally pockets out the wazoo for whatever you can think of or any of your camera accessories. So if you're a sports, birder, or wildlife photographer, this bag is for you. Use this QR code that you can see on the screen now, or click the link in the description to not only save some money on this backpack, but also to help directly support this channel. Thanks again to PGY Tech for sponsoring this video. So film grain for photography was not the only thing they added in this firmware update. They actually have quite a few things, one of them being film grain for video. So like I said before, this clip that you're watching is filmed with film grain enabled. Now, there are some drawbacks. You can't film in 10-bit, you can't film in log, so I'm down to 8-bit, and this color is gonna be burned in. And I have the film grain setting set to 1. There's only 3 sensitivity settings, there's no size settings, but based off of the images before, I went with the lowest possible number just to see what it looks like. Now, this is probably a feature that I would never use. I don't really want to bake in film grain into my video files, but maybe you find it interesting, and maybe the rendition for it is nice, and it saves you a step in your post-processing. Some of the other features they added, well, before I get to the other features, really quick, I just want to commend Nikon for this firmware update or past firmware updates, because I think there's other camera manufacturers out there that think that when they update an older camera, it's going to not be able to sell their new camera, and they'll just sell all the features in the new camera, and they won't update some of their older cameras that aren't even that old. Whereas Nikon, for example, gave this camera, the ZF, the firmware 2.0 update, and I legitimately would not have bought this camera if it wasn't for that update, adding the flexible color profiles and enabling recipes on the camera. To me, this literally sold me the camera, and I think that it's a nice mentality switch where they can add worthwhile features to slightly older cameras and still help sell those older cameras because of those new worthwhile features, rather than being like, well, we're not going to add it to a camera we've already sold a couple of, we'll add it to the new one so we can sell more of that one. So I just have to commend Nikon for doing this, and I think that this is another big firmware upgrade that's adding a feature that many people were asking for. So thank you to Nikon. So some of the other things they've added is, well, it's more than just what I'm going to go through, but I just want to give you the highlights. So they've added the customization to be able to customize the front command dials to do more than just change shutter speed or aperture. You can now change ISO and exposure compensation, if that's something you're interested in. They've given a really specific setting to how the EVF automatically switches between the LCD and the EVF. But basically what it means is currently you can set it to automatically switch, just like most cameras where when you put your eye up to the EVF, it'll switch. The problem is if you're a hip shooter and pretend this area is my hip and you bring the camera closer and closer and you're looking down at the LCD that's popped out and you're looking at it, it'll automatically switch to EVF because it detects that it's close to your, well, again, your hip. And then now you can't see what's on the LCD. So they've added a setting where it will not automatically switch to the EVF when you have the screen out. It'll only automatically switch to the EVF if you have it docked in either orientation, closed or open. So that might be useful if you are the type of person that does that kind of shooting a lot. Some of the other things they added was more grid options to aspect ratios if you need. I think they added 4:3 and 16:9 for framing your images using the grid. And they also added USB streaming so you can use the ZF as a webcam, which is just honestly just a really nice convenient feature. So if you plug your camera in now through the USB-C to your laptop, it'll detect it as a webcam and you can just use it for your Zoom calls and you can look like you've $1 million with your nice shallow depth of field full frame webcam sensor. Of course, I'll include a link down below that has all of the firmware updates that you can find in the description. And I just have to say thank you again to Nikon for giving us this stuff for free. It's pretty great. And in terms of the film grain for photography, it's something that I will continue to dabble with and probably enable on some of my photos. The best part is that I can turn it off if I want to. If I get home and those film grain settings that I selected were too much, I can just throw it into NX Studio or even Lightroom and just turn off the film grain if it's something that I don't like about the image. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you really did, consider liking it. And if you loved it, consider subscribing, but definitely do not subscribe unless you actually resonate with the content that I'm making or me as a creator in general. Thank you for being here regardless. I hope you liked it. I'll see you on the next one. There's got to be a ramp out there somewhere. We just got to go find it. Later.